Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's panel. We are talking all about speculative fiction debuts. I'm so excited to be jumping back into panel planning season or panel season, especially for the fall. I'm here for sci-fi and fantasy fall. So if you don't know who I am, my name's Lily. I'm the moderator for this panel and the face behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet. So we're going to have our lovely authors introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump into questions that I have. And if during the chat anyone has any questions that they want to ask, please drop them in the live chat, and I will try to keep an eye on that and go back to that at the end. So let's just start off with the author introductions with Amy.
Hello, my name is Amy Delaforce. I'm the debut romantic author of A Kiss of Hammer and Flame, which is out in the UK now and comes out in the US on 2nd of December. I guess a little about the book. It's the story of Kara, who is a blacksmith. She forges a sword, which kicks off this whole prophecy and basically raises a dark immortal. It's got lots of like court intrigue, your forbidden romance, slow burn, love triangle, that sort of stuff. So yes, that's my book.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Ramira. I am the debut author of Her Soul for a Crown, which came out just under 2 weeks ago. It is a slow burn romantasy based on Sri Lankan history and mythology that follows a young woman with a penchant for poisons and who wants to end the rule of evil rajas in her kingdom. She's willing to do anything for that to happen, including selling her soul to the blood Yaka Riri.
Hi, I'm Jackson. My debut urban fantasy came out in July. It's called The Reaper. It reimagines the Grim Reaper as a supernatural assassin born with a killing curse. And he meets a Jamaican empath in London, and together they team up to fight crime and solve mysteries throughout the city. Beneath London, there's like a magical hidden city called Downstairs, which they have to kind of keep in checks that the humans upstairs don't know about it. And their first mission is to basically track down a witch and a warlock who are up to no good.
Hi everyone, my name is Marv and I'm the author of Firstborn of the Sun, which is out in October on 23rd. And I have a little note here on it just because I always forget my page, but I'm just going to read it out. On the night of a great blood moon, 7 children were born to a man. Nearly 2 decades later, the mysteries of that night still haunt the kingdom. Which one of them was born first, which was born to die, and which of them will rule? So it is kind of a mystery adventure epic fantasy that is heavily inspired by Yoruba culture with the myths and histories, and it pulls a lot on politics, courtly intrigue, but also the adventure of things like first love and trying to not die really in a fantasy world.
Hi everyone, I'm Maddie Martinez. My debut, The Maiden and Her Monster, comes out in 2 weeks on September 9th in the US and September 11th in the UK. It is a sapphic reimagining of the Jewish myth of Golem, in which a young woman ventures into a cursed forest to hunt the monster that's been killing the girls of her village. She finds a monster, but it's not who she expects, a disgraced golem who agrees to turn herself in, but if and only if she helps her free the imprisoned rabbi who created her first.
So I think my first question is talking a little bit about the journey from inspiration to now. We have a bunch of different kind of spread out release dates, so I think this would be really fun to kind of talk about now and the relativity, I guess, of now. Amy, do you want to start?
Sure. Inspiration. So I don't know. Mine's a bit of a random one because I had the idea when I was at university. So I think I feel that was like circa 2008. And it was really just like a concept about I wanted there to be a gothic fallen city that held the ultimate weapon that 3 kingdoms surrounding it were fighting over. And that was kind of what came to me first. And then from that, it was just trying to tease out everything else. So, you know, who I wanted my main character to be, which is rare for me. I don't usually have story ideas first. I usually I'm very character driven. So I always have characters that come first. And so this one was trying to figure out, well, who do I actually want my main character to be now? So that was cool. But yeah, so I guess the aesthetics are very like goth ancient Egypt, which my publicist was happy I could put down to like 3 words. But yeah, so that carries a lot through it. And then there's like dark fantasy forests and a little bit of, I guess, some of the kind of fantasy kingdom stuff that you used to in books, and then other bits and pieces of things too. So it's a bit of a amalgamation from my obsessive love as a child of ancient Egypt.
For me, I started with in 2019, I came across an article that was comparing some of Sri Lanka's queens to like fictional queens in books. And the first queen, Anula, was compared to Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones. And I was like, let me read more about this. So like the whole article like kind of just said that in the history books, Anila only got like one sentence, basically saying that she had poisoned 6 husbands to get to the throne. And then that was it. And the history books like moved on. And I was like, wait, please. There's so much more that we could do with this story. But she was from 47 BC, and Sri Lanka has been colonized multiple times since then. And so a lot of the history was lost, and there wasn't so much to know about her life before or after ruling, or like during ruling. So when I did that research, I also was looking into like what else was happening in Sri Lanka at the time. What was the world like? What was the religion like? And so I found a lot of myth and a lot of demonology, and that is how I found the yakas, which was part of the demonology lore at the time. And that's how we came to get 2 point of view characters and the enemies to lovers situation between Anula and the Blood Yaka. And I had a lot of fun researching. And then when I like, you know, ancient worlds have holes in them that we can fill in world building. So I had a lot of fun putting in my own love of Sri Lanka, which was like the jewels and the saris and the food.
Mine was probably just a mixture of different things. I've always been into Grim Reaper stories. It's just something that I'm just naturally a morbid person anyway. And it was when my mum, she lent me her copy of Mort by Terry Pratchett, because I was already writing a little like Grim Reaper story, and that kind of just helped me to recontextualize my Grim Reaper, because anyone who's read anything from Terry Pratchett, you know that it's very like irreverent, and his Grim Reaper is like very funny and quite sarcastic and everything. And so I wanted to make my own one. So my Grim Reaper, he likes tea. He drinks a lot of tea. He's like really soft spoken, and he walks into a room and everyone's very like reverent, but then he just has no idea just how much power he has when he talks to people. He's quite posh as well. He's very rich, you know. So it was more that I wanted to just develop like a very fun character, because he's an assassin. It's like part of his power. Like he's so soft spoken and polite, but then he can kill you just in a heartbeat. So that's kind of what it was really about. Just a mixture of the things that I like to read. This city, because it's set in London, like there's so much inspiration to get from London, because there's so many things happening. So yeah, that's kind of just a mixture. It's like a kaleidoscope of different things that I've seen and spoken about and read and heard.
For Firstborn of the Sun, I really loved the idea of playing around with elemental magic, but I wanted to do something different with it. And I wanted to pull in some of the powers that Yoruba culture believes in, as a part of myth and the gods that exist. So I just decided to kind of split up the different kingdoms and places into people who use what I call old magic, which then depends on the god, whatever god is your patron and what they're able to do. On the other hand, we have very simply almost like fire and ice magic, but are kind of warping it in a way where they can't create heat but not actual fire. And with ice they can do things and play around with the void. If you imagine space as being ice, but if you get tossed out the airlock in space, you kind of freeze, but there's no real ice there. So playing around with the extremes of what fire and ice are without the actual fire and ice, and also seeing how this affects the people that you give these powers to. So basically, how do regular people transform when they have power at their fingertips? But then when everyone has this power, what then becomes the true sign of authority and power and privilege? If we're all the same, if I have the same power as you have, then something has to differentiate us. And how will people take advantage of that and create loopholes and find things to make to almost stand out? That is what most of the world is like in the Kingdom of Ori, which is in Firstborn of the Sun. But then our main character has none of these, so she has none of the things I've talked about. She doesn't have any access to the hit powers that everyone in her kingdom has. And this basically starts the inciting incident, in that they're quite terrified now, because we're like, we all have it. If you don't have it, does that mean there's a chance we'll lose ours? If we kill you, maybe we just pretend it never happened. And then there's no risk of anyone losing their powers. And so that is kind of started the beginning, kind of foundational of what will turn eventually be this 600-page book.
For The Maiden and Her Monster, it was kind of an amalgamation of things, kind of like Jackson mentioned. I was historically, I was really interested in what happens like right on the edge of a collapsing empire. Specifically, I was really interested in the collapse of the Catholic Church in the late Middle Ages in the Bohemian Empire. And so that was really fascinating to me. On the other end of things, I really wanted to write a story about a hot monster in the woods. So I was like, how can I combine these two? And the Golem inspiration actually came because I don't even know how I got here, but I was reading a liturgical poem that was like, it was a parody of this pogrom that happened in 1300s in Prague. And I was like, oh, I feel like we don't talk about pogroms happening in any other period of history except for the Holocaust and the 20th century. And when in reality, they've been a thing that's been happening for centuries. And so that kind of led me back to the myth of the golem, and that kind of like that trifold made everything turn into what The Maiden and Her Monster ended up being.
So now I want to ask a little bit about the speculative fiction side and ask sort of about speculative fiction world building. What challenges did you have with the book? And also specifically, how did you solve them? So not only kind of what was hard, but also how did you solve them? Alicia, do you want to start?
Yeah. So the challenge for me was twofold. For one, I had to decide how much history I was going to put in the book and how much of it was going to be my fantasy brain coming up with stuff. So I did a lot of research, and I don't know if it was thankfully or not, but like I said, this is from 47 BC. The kingdom of Anuradhapura is a World UNESCO site now. So there is information, but the ruins are like very minimal. They're mostly just rocks. Like they're not partial pieces of buildings or walls or anything like that. So I did have to come up with my own. So I took a lot so I like started as a base with the research, and then kind of filled holes firstly with like what is now in Sri Lanka in terms of physical buildings and architecture and style and that kind of stuff. And then just, yeah, made things up like we do in speculative fiction. But I wanted to keep it as Sri Lankan as I could. So that was my fix for like physical things. Other than that, like the speculative, yeah, I had the yakas, the demonology, but again, I had to make the decision of like how much was I going to stick with how those beings were characterized in demonology versus how they would be characterized in the book, and like what I wanted to do with them in terms of them being characters and having character arcs and having, do they have emotions or not? I decided yes, they have emotions. So that was really fun to like play with them, and I felt like bringing them to life in a new light, kind of like I did with was doing with Anula's story, giving her, I felt like, a better story than the history books gave her. So I kind of wanted to do the same thing with the Yakas of, you know, in demonology, they are just villains. They are just the bad guys. They're just there to kill and spread disease and all this. And I was like, well, what if they weren't? What if, you know, they could use their powers for good? Or what if they thought they were using their powers for good? That kind of stuff. So I had fun playing with that and then playing with like what they could actually do. And then I inserted partly my another like religion, basically, that the yakas weren't the only ones that humans could pray to. There are these things called divinities, and that is not from history or mythology. That is purely speculative from my brain. And the divinities liked to make basically magicked objects, which they called blessed gifts. One of which is prevalent is that you can like walk inside a painting and be in whatever scene was painted and like experience it. So if you walk into like what I have up here is like a hilly hilltop overlooking like a lake, you would feel the breeze, you could touch the grass, you could go swim in the lake, that kind of thing. And I had a lot of fun playing with that.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe Jackson, you're next. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest challenge for me was trying to strike the balance between it being a low stakes story but with a high stakes background, because it is like urban fantasy typically has quite like the world building isn't very very deep, and so I didn't want to go too beyond the scope of like the typical, you know, solving crimes within London. But at the same time, because I had like a background of like this law of the Grim Reaper, and then the four horsemen are part of it as well, and then they like exist somewhere in space, and so I didn't want it to draw in. I was trying to strike a balance between having that like background story, but also keeping it grounded in London. And so I think that was sometimes the story that in the early drafts was kind of like spiraling away from me. I didn't want it to be this big, massive, cosmic, planetary conflict, but at the same time, there is a reason why my Grim Reaper is the way that he is, and what his curse means. It has like a background to it. So I think that was like my biggest challenge. And also just trying to keep it fresh as well, because there are so many Grim Reaper stories, and you kind of have to end up doing so much reading to make sure that I'm not overlapping with what's already been written before, whilst also keeping mine unique and fresh. So those are like my biggest challenges.
I had quite a few challenges with mine actually, because I was trying to do a really big one. And this is why I have like a whiteboard to remember things. But one of the things I remember was interesting was having this character that lives in this desert kingdom where everyone has the, you know, ability to harness the magic of the sun or the power of the sun, and except her. There needed to be a way for her to have survived up until the time she's in now. because it will be quite obvious because they have it, they use it for everything. So it's a desert kingdom. They use it to regulate their temperature, so they're not sweating too much. They can be out in the sun without getting too burnt. They use it for cooking. So you would very easily notice, and when they use their powers, their hands glow. So you very easily notice when someone isn't using their powers. And so I then introduced the concept of old magic, which is then connecting people to the old Yoruba gods. And there are a few Yoruba gods that kind of deal with, like, have power magic or fire magic. And so I gave her one of them, who is Shango. And what she does then is she has her blades that she can kind of summon Shango to help create the illusion of fire through these blades. And so that she can, go out in public and people will think that she's just using her powers as opposed to her using this old magic. And to just add a bit more tension to that, I then made the use of old magic illegal, because everyone's born with magic. And so there's a law in this kingdom that because we're all born with kind of powers and magic already, you can't summon any of the old gods because it's kind of like cheating. So only the people in the royal family or in the royal priesthood can summon the old gods to use them for whatever kind of magic. And with the old gods, the elemental powers extend beyond just fire and ice, but to like things like divination and earth magic and all the other things that you think of when you think of soft magic, just across the board. And so even though she can hide using this kind of illusion of fire magic that she also has to speak the words quite physically. But people who are born with it don't have to. And so she also has to, and she gets into fight very often. And so she has to kind of whisper to make sure the gods can hear her. But like the person she's fighting with can't hear her, because then she gets into even more trouble. It's on one hand, she's in trouble for not having the power she should have been born with. But on the other hand, she will also get in trouble for this illusionary magic that she's using by accessing the old gods and summoning them, illegally. And so I found that bringing in these two elements into trying to answer the question of how is she alive? How did no one notice? And also building her character to, it forces her to be a risk taker, just as, on the grounds of I need to survive, I need to leave the house, I need to fall in love, which she does. But then she is then forced to hide this secret from everyone, including the person she falls in love with. And that whole concept alone, just building her character and giving her tools to survive in this world, extended, significantly the world building, because everything had to support her existence. And yeah, that was quite fun to do.
I think Marv brings up a really interesting point that I relate to, and that I think was helpful in dealing with challenging world building. For The Maiden and Her Monster, it's a second world fantasy, so everything is made up. It does not exist in this world. And there are a lot of challenges that come with that, because nothing is familiar to the reader, and you have to build a world that feels engaging and real, and that your characters exist in, and that they have challenges in, and stuff like that, reminiscent of our world. And I think one of the ways that was helpful to navigate that was by building the world in service of the characters and in service of the conflict and the plot that you are writing, because unless you write a really long series or something like that, you are very limited in the scope of your world building in a second world fantasy, especially for me in a standalone. So you can't include everything, and you can't have it feel like, you can't say everything, but you, at the same time, you want to have it feel like a fully embellished world. And so I think that sort of interaction between the characters and the way that they interact with the world is a really good way to tackle that. And then also, when you're dealing with mythology, I think that also is a really interesting way to infuse world building and make a world that feels real, but also grounds the reader. And similarly, with the golem, there's stories about golems, and specifically the story that inspired me, The Golem of Prague, is this very short story. And I wanted to think, oh, well, what if there's more to this story? What if there's a whole thing that happened and this is just the part that got carried on? And so, yeah, that was instrumental, I think, in informing my world building. And then also because the golem, the magic and the mysticism that creates the golem is so intrinsically tied to language. I found that that was a really interesting thing to incorporate as my magic system. So yeah, just the world building, keeping it in service to the characters, and the conflict in your book.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the second world and feeling the pressure to kind of, because mine is a series, but when I wrote it, that like wasn't a guarantee. I needed to write it as a standalone so I could pitch it as potential for a series, but also just in case that wasn't going to happen, have it stand on its own feet. And it is really difficult to feel like you're getting that balance right with, you know, giving enough information to feel like you've created this immersive space, but at the same time not be info dumping on people and making sure that it's kind of like you're giving sprinkles throughout like the whole story and stuff. So yeah, I definitely can relate to that. I think some of the stuff that I struggled with was really around the main prophecy that I've got in the book is very much the knowledge of it that exists is retained in the upper class. So anyone that's not nobility doesn't really know any specific details. And it was good in some ways because you kind of had my female main character as that baseline character that like didn't know all this stuff. So she was able to learn. But where it then got difficult for me later is balancing that knowledge with every character and going, okay, who knows what and who knows that someone else knows something, and just lots of like those little rightly red herrings where I've got to remember everyone's relationship with everyone else and who knows what knowledge. So I think just balancing that stuff out was tricky, but even I guess like the way that I approached the question, because my sort of speculative what if was really what if there was a personification of hell that wasn't the devil, but like a moral immortal, and you were that being's master. And that's kind of where, outside of the core concepts, like the rest of everything built out from. And so that was probably my big question that I had to solve for, and then thinking about what does that look like in combination with all the other little bits and pieces of things that you kind of have to thread in along the way as a fantasy writer. So it's a tricky balance. But yes, I there's lots of things people have said that definitely resonate. So yeah.
I'm going to jump into some questions that kind of pair some common themes and common, writing things in books together. I just wanted to remind people who are watching that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat and I will try to get back to them. The first one that I want to talk about is the theme of revenge. So the theme of revenge in both Her Soul for a Crown and The Maid and Her Monster. Not only specifically the idea of kind of what draws you to the exploration of even the topic of revenge, but I also, in both of the books, um, was also intrigued by like how you both talk about the struggle for revenge and also the struggle internally for revenge. I didn't want to write this question with spoilers in it, but that is, I guess, how vague I can be about it. Should we start with Her Soul for a Crown?
Yeah. So revenge stories are like my catnip. I love revenge stories. I've loved revenge stories for years. So I wanted to write one, obviously. So yeah, and part of like exploring a revenge story, what I really liked was the persistence a person has to have. Revenge, especially when the scale gets bigger and bigger, the timing of revenge like has to be thought out and well done, or else like your revenge isn't gonna work. And so I really liked having Anila be this very ambitious, very persistent, type A, like hyper focused person. Like she's got one goal, and that is revenge. And I kind of put a little bit of myself into that, of just like I get like super hyper focused and I am super persistent when I have a goal in mind. So yeah, I wanted to kind of like show that in her character. And then as I was developing the story and her arc, because I am very character driven, I wondered, I had to think about what the struggle is, not just like outward antagonists or um, obstacles, and like how does one do a good revenge, but the internal. And like I think one of the biggest things when I think of revenge is like, yeah, once you've done it, like are you changed, or are you just like happy all of a sudden, like if anger was the thing driving you. um and like how does that change as you get closer or as you get farther away, if it looks like you're going to fail. And for Anila, she has a lot of past trauma that she hasn't really faced, that she kind of just bottled up and put it in a little container marked revenge. And she was like, everything will feel better once I've done my revenge. So yeah, it was fun kind of exploring the struggle, going not even just for revenge, but your struggle to like going towards a big goal. Whatever that goal may be, there are internal struggles because you constantly have to be like faced with whether you are succeeding or failing. And there are emotions that come with that. So that's kind of how I tackled that.
Yeah, I think this question is really interesting because when I was writing this book, revenge wasn't at the forefront of my mind. And that got me thinking about the line between justice, revenge, and redemption, and how all three of those, depending on how you look at them, depending on who you are in the situation, can bleed into the other. And so I think that is a really interesting point, because also what looks like revenge for one person could be what another person thinks of as justified, and what one thinks is justice, the other one could think of as them getting redemption. So I think that the way that that is, I guess, explored in The Maiden and Her Monster, and what's interesting about that to me is this malleability in beliefs, and how a person's beliefs shapes the actions that they do and how they perceive the actions that they do. I think I especially found this interesting while writing because my villain and my main character are kind of foils of each other, but they both interact with the piece of information very differently, or like what their perceived information is very differently, that's at odds with each other. And whether one is able to grow from that or not grow from that, or one is able to be self-aware and the other one isn't able to be self-aware, is a playground that I really like and thinks makes for really interesting tension and storytelling.
Yeah, I love what you were saying about those three words, because I think that they're used in some senses and in some situations quite interchangeably, but they have such different nuanced meanings. As you were saying, based on sort of the relative position of whoever is asking, or like the relative position of whoever's in that situation. Um, the next question that I have talks about the Reaper and Firstborn of the Sun in terms of perspective, and kind of what Amy was talking about earlier, what knowledge you might know versus what knowledge someone else knows. I thought that your books both navigate the idea of knowledge and like specifically knowledge that other people don't know really interestingly in terms of the perspective work. So I wanted to know from you both if there is a journey at arriving at the idea of introducing more than one kind of window, and if you had unexpected challenges as well with having to introduce that idea. Jackson, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think first of all the challenge with the two perspectives. Well, there's a few perspectives, but the main two are Gerald and Amy, and Gerald is the Grim Reaper and Amy is the empath, and I think in the beginning, because there's so much that Gerald has, like he has all these special powers, he has this great background, he's a magical creature, it was easier to kind of get into his perspective because you can just show off a lot and have lots of fun things happening. And so one of my a very earlier drafts that my editor had, they did mention that Gerald felt more like a person, like fleshed out, and Amy was more just like a mirror, like she stands for the reader. So she's been introduced to this new world, and it she didn't really have much of a personality. So I had to work hard with like giving her her own challenges and really showing her background and the reason why she's where she is, why she is lonely, just walking around London trying to find supernatural creatures, and why she wanted to go with Gerald and why she was excited to, see this new world. And it's so weird because even though I went through so much trying to flesh her out, now that we've had the finished product and the book is out there, like people really like her. Like she's actually more popular than Gerald, and they say that they love like how she's still growing and trying to find her own way in this world. So I think that was my first like challenge to get the two of them together. But because even though she is just the human and Gerald is the Grim Reaper, that they work well and they complement each other because he's learning about what it means to be human from her perspective. So he's here, he's like he resides over Earth in a way, and death means nothing to him, life means nothing to him. He just lives for this job, which is to kill people. And so when he meets her, she's like a working class girl from South London. She has her own like little quirks and fun things, and she is an empath, so she feels everyone's emotions, she feels what they're going through, their anxieties, their issues, and so she has a very close connection with humanity and with issues of race and class and things. And then Gerald, he doesn't really know this stuff, so he's having to learn from her perspective. So from his chapters, and when it switches to his POV, he's more trying to understand what it means to be just a human of Earth, whereas Amy's learning about the different supernatural creatures, learning about the underground city and what is her place within it. And she learns that they're kind of wary of humans. They think that humans are inferior, and that's just another thing that she has experienced as being like a black woman from a working class background. And so yeah, I kind of like playing with the two different things that they both have to learn. So even though Gerald, he's this all powerful killing machine, he does have a lot to learn about just perhaps the reasons why some of his targets might be doing the things that they're doing. So the two targets in this book, they are from both disadvantaged backgrounds. And so he just thinks that they're ridiculous. Like, why on earth are you even doing this? Well, it doesn't matter because I'm killing you anyway. And then, but then she's like, well, when you don't have a lot, you end up making decisions that might cause you to go into crime. So perhaps you should think about that before you just accept every task that you're given. So yeah, I just thought that they both had things to learn through their perspectives. And obviously we have like the other people's POVs, like the villains and the friends. And I feel like this is just a story that everybody is learning something, and everybody's also extremely like lonely and quite cut off from other people. So I wanted to bring that out as well in their perspectives.
With First One of the Sun, I started with 8 point of views. That was too much. I When I finished writing it, I got an editor before I queried, and one of her feedback was, "You have too many point of views," and I was so upset. I'm like, "That's the only way to tell this story." But I took like 2 months to really think about who needed to be in the room. and whose eyes I need to be telling the story from. And so I managed to cut it down to four, which was a huge task. But then I reduced it down to four of the youngest people in the cast. And so I took all the adults out. And the reason I had them in the first place was because, again, the adults hold almost all the secrets. They're the ones who are controlling and puppeteering. You know, there's the king, there's the regent, there's the elders. They're the ones who are kind of scheming, and they're scheming almost on behalf of the younger guys, and hoping that they will just fall in line. And so I had to switch perspective all round to make it that some of the kind of younger cast knew a little bit or enough to influence even themselves, and they had to pick their allegiances quite sooner than I would have wanted in the first draft. And so we have our main character who's an outcast for many reasons, and we have the prince that she falls in love with, who they're kind of all around the same age. We have the heir to the kingdom who lives in the royal palace, and we have a maiden assassin who is sent to capture the prince and the outcast, our main character, when they run away from his responsibilities, because she doesn't want him to die. And she's just like, I will save you from the gods. And the maiden's like, no, you will not. And so it meant that they almost split in doubles. So the heir and the maiden have similar, not identical, but similar enough goals to be on the same side, in that they want to bring back the guys who've run away. And of course, the other half are trying to run away. So that really helped with splitting it out. And also, while they were on the run, because it is an adventure in that they go from city to city, someone had to remain in the palace to tell us what's going on and tell us the secrets and show us the courtly intrigue part of the book. And so I was like, we have to be seeing it through his eyes. And the few chapters where the adults are speaking and arguing and talking in almost code, and he's thinking, I'm going to be king. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, what? Everyone stop and start telling me what is happening. And that happened a few times. And one, it helped to show that how much he didn't know, but also it just helped to tell the reader what was really going on, because I really needed to make sure that there was a point for him to be there. Many times he was there just to witness and tell us. Other times it was he's kind of chosen his allegiance and where he wants to stand, and we're seeing the kind of person he'll be in the future through his eyes. But because he's heir, every decision he makes affects the people who are on the run. So that's our main character and the guy that she's with. That was how I decided to kind of split out information and who knows what. And as we come towards the end of the book, a lot of the reveals are, I don't think there's a reveal that's a surprise to everyone in the cast, including the reader, if you count the reader as the fifth person. So at least one person between the four characters and the reader knows what's happening. And so sometimes the reveal is really more the reaction of the people who don't know. I think I have just one reveal where no one knows what's going to happen, but I don't think it's until book 3, because that's really hard to pull off, because I need to make sure that I'm carrying the reader along, but also making sure that the person who does have the secret is able to. So with secrets, I also have this thing in the world where I thought was really cool, because Yoruba is a culture that lives and breathes on oral tradition, and that means the culture is almost held in memory. It depends on how much I remember from what I was taught to tell someone else, and then they have to remember. And a lot of information gets lost that way, and I find it to be such a tragedy. And so in this world, they believe that you go to hell if you die with a secret that you know for a fact no one else in the world knows. So say, for example, you killed your dad. That's a random one. And you know that no one else in your family knows this, and no one else in the world knows this, because it's a small secret if you consider it on the scale of like dramatic things happening in the world. No one really, if you're not like the king or something and you're just a random family of farmers, no one really cares that this random man died 10 years ago. But if you're the only one on earth who knows this secret, you have to tell someone. And so usually with people's dying breaths, they're telling all their secrets, like, oh, I killed my dad, I killed this person, I killed that person, I know that the neighbor did this. You literally with your last breath, you kind of have to say everything, otherwise they believe that they'll go to hell. And this was my way of trying to preserve, in that no secret goes out of the world. And so lots of people die in the book, and so we get to hear their secrets. And of course, it affects the main cast. But you don't have to tell anyone this secret until you're dying. So
Yeah, I love the interplay and the perspectives and how it really kind of changes. Has ripple effects and like changes stories and the characters as well. Um, the last question I have is talking about kind of the idea of being a weapon, but not only that, about having kind of your own power, your own capability turned against us. And so for The Maiden and Her Monster and A Kiss of Hammer and Flame, I would love if you could both chat about how this kind of theme relates to your books and also how you came about the idea of kind of having your potential or like your power, your ability turned against us. Amy, do you want to start?
Sure. So I guess with the weapon in my book, it's kind of like what Marvin Jackson was talking about with people not knowing certain things. And so in the book, it's really like my main character's love interest, Hell, is the dark immortal that is the ultimate weapon. But because he's been locked in an underground tomb for 400 years, no one knows that the weapon is like an animate thing. And this comes out fairly early on. But so what I guess the way that I approached that to make it interesting was that, you know, the other kingdoms thought it was just going to be like some kind of sword. They didn't really have an understanding of what anything might entail apart from this equals power. And I didn't necessarily do it intentionally. Like I didn't set out for it to be, I guess, like that way around, you know, a weapon and what it means for your own personal power. But coincidentally, it did end up happening that, you know, the people that are orchestrating the wars for him are rich men, rich older men. So, you know, I guess there's that little patriarchal piece in there that shockingly found its way in. But yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can really say around that. Not so much. I might hand over to Maddie.
Yeah, this theme was very important, central, inextricable from the book, because the myth of the golem is about this creature who is created from clay or stone, depending on the telling, and its sole purpose was to protect Jews from harm and protect them from harm via violence. And so it felt intrinsic to the myth to talk about violence and to talk about the necessity of violence, or what happens when we make violence into a person. And I think that was something that was really important for me to explore, specifically in this retelling, where the golem character in my book is this like woman figure, and she can speak. She has her own, like, she's a character, and she has her own wants and desires and stuff, even if she doesn't think that she can embrace those necessarily. But I think she does struggle a lot with the fact that she was made to be a weapon. And I think that especially it's interesting when we talk about women as weapons, because that is such a real thing throughout history, and weaponizing feminine like characters like that. And so that was really interesting to play with. And I especially liked playing with violence I mentioned a little bit earlier, talking about the necessity of it, and especially how that relates to power, because I think that is kind of tied as well, the relationship between violence and power. And I think I think I can't remember the second part of your question, but I know it was like about power. And I think especially what attracts us so much to weapons and avenues of power is that it can often be used against people, and oppressors try to take power away from people, and that's like the way that that they seek to do that. And so that was also something that I wanted to explore in The Maiden and Her Monster, and what happens when somebody tries to take away power, and that power is a weapon who is a person. So kind of like making that more of like a person than just a theory or a concept.
Yeah, I love how you both talked about that, and how, yeah, the intersection between agency and also power, I think, is incredibly relevant there. We have one question, which I hope we can answer really quickly before our panel's done. But it is, what's one fun fact from your story or world that didn't make the final version of your book? Jackson, do you want to start? I know it's hard because it's like a spur of the moment question.
No, it's fine. Do you know what? Yeah. There was one. So I had like a whole like side story with this young warlock who caused a lot of issues in the background of the story, who they will have to confront him in an area of like North London. But yeah, my editor just said that his storyline just wasn't really, it wasn't going anywhere, and it was just taking up the word count, so I had to cut that out. But what was sad about that is because there was like this banter moment between a mage, like two mages, during the cleanup of that whole fight with this warlock, and so there was a lot of like banter and a lot of like there was just flinging around lots of London slang and being silly with each other, so I had to like completely just cut that all out. But the two characters that were having that little the banter, they're still there so they still come about in the story, but yeah, that entire storyline with like, yeah, that silly strange warlock, I had to cut it out. So I was sad about that, but it has made the story flow a bit better. So
in mine, there's this I lost when I was cutting down the point of views. There was one of the wives of the high priest, and she had lied terribly, and she was caught like 20 years later. And because we're in her mind, she goes from kind of begging for her life to thinking, why am I begging this man? Like, and being in her head really allowed us to think, you know what? Like, no. And then she got up and she was thinking, I have like raised your son. I'm like, you have a perfectly good heir. Like, he's great. He's powerful. I did that. So yeah, I did lie, but I'm not going to be begging you. And he tries to have her arrested, and she's really powerful, and she fights them off using, Agbara, or which is the power magic of the sun. And she accidentally sets her dress on fire, and she had come in to beg wearing her wedding dress. So it was this flamboyant, huge red dress, because she wanted to like remind him that he was in love with her once. And she accidentally sets her trail on fire, and she absolutely did not care, and she walked out of the court where she was like sentenced to exile, in like a blaze of flames with her dress on fire, and like it stunk so bad, but she did not care, and she was just like, I will keep walking. It didn't hit the same, obviously, when we're not in her mind, to see the shift from, okay, I begged you once, I will not beg you again, and now I'm going to fight for my own survival. And she just lives in this kind of glory of flames, and she does kind of get out. But I loved that scene so much, because it was just like, yeah, I am on fire, but I will not turn back.
Mine is pretty short. I can't really say the situation without spoiling it, but basically I originally had this like pulley elevator system in the castle that they used, and I had a lot of fun. It felt very like secret adventure, like going through the elevators, going up floors and stuff, and like going out through hidden exits. It was just not like relevant. I like changed the ending so they were not needed anymore, even though they were cool. But I did recently remember that I had those, and I was like, oh my god, yeah, the pulley system, the little like shaft elevators, how fun.
I had a good one with when I sent my manuscript to my agent, the version that I sent her, I'd pulled out this chapter that ended up being, because I had a similar thing where it was just word count. I was trying to get the word count like under 100,000 words. And so I pulled out this chapter early on and I really liked it because, you know, like my story is quite pacey and I just had like a bit of a slower portion. I was like, oh, you know, it's good, like relationship building. And then when I was getting to I need to lose like 7,000 words, I thought, okay, this has got to go. And I was really sad about it because I was like, oh, I really like that chapter. And then when I signed with my publisher, when we went through the edits, she was just like, oh, you know, we just need to like, it's pacey, which is great, but we just need to give some breathing points. I was like, you know, and I want to just kind of like strengthen this relationship a bit. And I said, I've got this chapter. So I ended up being able to add it back in. So I lost it and I was really sad, but then I got to add it back in. I was like, yes. So that one's mine. It's in the pub at the start.
A fun fact about the story, I guess, is that I deleted so many drafts. The first draft, I only made it to like the 3/4 part of the way through, and like the enemies were still enemies and not anywhere near lovers, and like the plot had just basically kicked in and I had way too much world building. So like I tossed that. Nobody saw it. Not a critique partner, not my agent, nobody. And then I went through a couple of drafts with a critique partner, like almost chapter by chapter. So that felt like draft 2 and 3. And then I sent draft 3 basically to my agent and got notes back and decided that almost everything was still wrong. So I deleted everything after Act 1 and restarted after Act 1. And that was the draft, I guess draft 4 is what we then polished and then sent out to publishers. So yeah, Anilo had a lot of different stories going in different ways before we landed on what is in the published book.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone who was watching and also thank our lovely authors for chatting with us today. I've left the bookshop links, or like the book links basically, for all the books in the description box below. So please make sure that you check them out and pick them up and also pre-order. So I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day and rest of your reading year too. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.